Hi everybody. Wish I could be there with you today to share in the remembrance and tribute to the life of Walter William Rerig. I did jot down some words, some thoughts that I'd had around his life and my recollections, and so I wanted to read those as part of a reading that you can play here hopefully at some point at the when things settle and you can all sit in front of the computer. So that said, here it goes. And sorry for the reading format. These thoughts come straight from the heart, but I did put them down on paper. I wanted to make sure I really captured the essence of what I wanted to say about Walter and his life. Walter William Rerig was a man who refused to be defined by any conventional definitions. His own man who, in the words of Frank Sinatra, did it his way. He always found a way to characterize any outcome as positive. What an incredible skill that every one of us could learn from. I recall that when he and one of his friends had gone hunting one season, they both spotted a deer and pulled the trigger at the same time. Both bullets found their mark, and they took the deer down. As they jaunted over and spotted the deer, they found that both bullets had hit. However, Walter's had found the deer's backside, while his friend's shot was the truer one and probably been the deciding blow. So as a gentleman, Walter let his friend mount the buck's head as his trophy and take it home. But true to Walter, rather than lament that loss, he took the hindquarters of that deer, had it stuffed and mounted over his own downstairs fireplace. And from that point forward, he'd proudly take people on a tour of his house. And when they came downstairs and they came up to the deer's ass that was mounted over his fireplace, he would say, "I got the part that went over the fence last." Classic Walter, seeing the upside. And it summed up the philosophy of his life. It's all good, in modern vernacular. Make lemonade out of lemons. Walter grew up and went through the Depression. And although I have no idea what those times were really like, unless you look at the Florida housing market, I suspect that Walter never let himself feel the despair that must have gripped most of the country. He continued to employ many men and women for as long as he possibly could in the family painting business and continued paying workers. And despite losing much of the family's wealth that they had accumulated during those difficult times, he always found a way to be a provider, and his family never wanted for anything in their entire life. He maintained a beautiful home, raised 2 daughters. Walter also had a way with women, as we all know. He was married 4 times, and nearly a 5th if he had had his way, with Lucky. The beautiful Ginger, billfold girl, who married Corporal Walter Rerig. Her life was cut short way too soon, but she bore the 2 women that eventually gave Walter the most joy throughout the rest of his life, Dana and Bonnie. Then after that it was Barbara, and then Betty, and the wonderful Joanne, who was the truest second love of his life as you could ever hope for in all of our lives. So I guess in a way you could say 4 out of 5 wasn't bad. But even Betty provided some time and some enjoyment, and I never heard Walter say a bad word. And at the end it was Lucky, who was such a joy in his later years. And Walter was someone who truly loved and lost, as the phrase goes, but it never stopped him from loving again. Walter was also the consummate salesman. He probably sold more property at Big Bass and Eagle Lakes than actually existed. It was from Walter that I learned that snakes couldn't survive because of the extreme altitudes in the Poconos, which was a great comfort to many a city housewife who was looking for their home in the country. And that was until they found a large snake curled up in the crawl space under their house. In reality, I probably owe most of my sales skills to some latent gene that Walter had passed along. Probably most of my bull skills as well. They call it writer's embellishment when an author exaggerates a story. I suppose Walter had that same skill, but it was for the story of his life. It was his verbal writer's embellishment. All the world was truly his stage. Walter was a can-do man in the classic American sense. First man up the ladder, last man off the roof. And if the roof was leaking, Walter was out in the rain, sleet, or snow fixing it. The mail service had nothing on him. I recall when my friend Frank had a flat tire miles from Big Bass Lake while he was returning my borrowed station wagon. Grandpa was there to rescue him with no questions asked. He just got in his car, went out, and fixed the darn thing. He had no real tolerance for people who lollygagged or couldn't figure out how to get things done. He had a way of charming women. And unfortunately for me, that latent gene was never really passed along. But I imagine it will surface in AJ or in Jack or in one of Kevin's next 3 or 4 boys. Somewhere along the line. In his later years, Walter became kinder, gentler, and happier as he aged. A quality we can all only fervently pray that we all possess. He made me appreciate the beauty in a simple stone or flower that he'd found in the backyard, or even a simple wallet or child's toy that he'd stowed away in one of his deep pockets. We could have nicknamed him Fingers, Rarig in his later years. But he shared all the objects he had found with me as if he'd found one of the world's most sought-after treasures. And in reality, he had. He had found them. He'd found the beauty in everything that had existed under God's watchful eye. And the truth is, if we can find love or hate, we can find love or hate, light or darkness, or good and evil in everything that we encounter. And we know which way Walter took it. He naturally saw the upside. When I was a little younger and even more cynical, which strangely I'm going the other way, becoming less cynical as I age, I would have called it naive, Walter's approach. But now that perhaps I'm a bit wiser, I think it is the only way to live. And that is a true legacy that Walter has left with me. A way of thinking about life, a way of being positive and looking at the upside. With a way of living life without reservations and with total freedom. And I have this strange feeling that Walter's up in heaven right now. He's driving a big Cadillac right down the middle of a 2-lane road. He's stopping off to grab a nice meal with Jesus and the prophets, showing them a particularly beautiful flower he'd found outside the restaurant. And by the end of the meal, they each have signed up to buy a quarter acre parcel down at Eagle Lake and taken an option on another quarter acre. And the waitress is smiling. Grandpa's charming her. He's got his arm around her. He's telling a great story. And life is good. I love you, Grandpa. Yakamaka.